welcome to another segment of Lore You Should Know. This is where I talk to the wonderful D&D folks about little bits of Dungeons & Dragons lore that is in upcoming books and just for you to know and use in your games if you're interested. And today I'm talking to Wes Schneider. Hi, Wes.
Hey.
You're the lead designer for Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, so of course we're jumping into another domain of dread to discuss, which is Dementlieu, which I have been practicing pronouncing for many months.
Yeah, as we got into this, I was just thinking oh shoot, do either of us actually speak French? Or are we going to be able to pull this off? So I'm glad that one of us has it nailed.
I'm not French by training or birth, so it's hard sometimes.
I mean, that's definitely one of the things that you see coming up in the domains of dread a lot, is that many of them wear their cultural background or the horror stories that inspire them very much on their sleeves. So you can see from Dementlieu that there's very much a sort of French inspiration to a bunch of the elements in here, with this more sort of decadent pre-revolutions sort of society with nobles and grand galas and whatnot, and the horrors that unfold there.
So that's the general overview of Dementlieu, right? That this is a kind of elevated monarchy full of decadent fairy tales in a bit.
That's the way that we've gone with it, yeah. And I think for a lot of folks who are familiar with Dementlieu from the 90s, that's not what they're going to be expecting, because that's not how it was presented in its original incarnations.
Yeah, so we have been updating and changing up a lot of the domains. So what was exciting about taking Dementlieu from Ravenloft's pasts and inserting this type of decadence, because that some of that is really creepy, but we didn't have a manifestation of that previously.
Yeah, so this was a place where Dementlieu in the 90s lacked focus. There was a number of domains of dread formerly in earlier editions of the campaign setting that essentially boiled down to European countryside plus ghost stories, or plus there's werewolves, or whatever have you.
Yeah.
With Van Richten's Guide, we really wanted to make each one of the domains a specific type of themed horror fun house. So, Barovia is the perfect example, where it's if you're going to Barovia, you're there for vampire times. If you're going to Lamordia, you're there for, Frankenstein-esque mad scientist stuff. What Dementlieu had going for it was, in the past, was sort of vague countryside, slightly French-inspired, but through bad Google Translate, plus maybe enchantment?
Yeah. So I mean, the current incarnation sounds really exciting, and you look at even the live action Beauty and the Beast, or some of the other modern incarnations and storytelling that takes Grimm's fairy tales that got a little bit family-ified by a certain company in the 50s and 60s, but now is going back towards the real horror roots that the brothers Grimm had in their storytelling, and bringing that part of it to life in Dementlieu is really interesting.
Yes. So that was the direction where we took that history of, enchantment, of characters that are at these grand balls, these nobilities versus sort of an impoverished lower class, and really played into, let's do a domain that feels like fairy tale, that feels like this is Cinderella going to the ball, but the ball is fundamentally creepy, and the fairy godmother is hags, and
yeah, which probably they were. Let's just be honest, they were probably hags. So, who is the Dark Lord of Dementlieu in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft?
So in the new book, the Dark Lord is Duchess Sadria Dianere. And this is a character who draws some inspirations from the former Dark Lord, Dominic Dionere. But like with the entire domain, we've given her much more of a sort of a tragic Cinderella meets Poe's Mask of the Red Death sort of combination. So she is this character who is obsessed with status and place and making sure that only the finest people come to her events. Like the entire domain is for her pretty much an opportunity to have these self-inflating galas and over-the-top expressions of control and power and decadence, which once you get into your history for her, you'll realize she never had growing up and tragedy ensues.
She's new money, I see.
Actually very much, and is trying to hide it. Like being an imposter is at the root of the new vibe for Dementlieu, which as much as it is a fairy tale horror sort of setting and plays with like these high fantasy elements, it's also a psychological horror setting because everybody who's invited to Duchess Dionere's grand galas has a secret, is lying about something, and none of them ultimately belong. But if they are exposed during these events, the wraith-like Duchess Dionere will just smite them immediately. So she's this terrifying presence that everybody sort of needs to be around while also being utterly terrified of her.
Ooh, all right. So I kind of like that idea of it not just being a masquerade ball that you're attending, but your entire existence and your life is a masquerade. And if you step out of line, then you are ruining her meta game and therefore must be destroyed.
Absolutely. But like that's it in a nutshell, where the big element of experiences in the domain, like, yes, you can go through the entire domain, you can go through the whole city, which comprises much of the domain, the city of Portalucine, and you can have various adventures, but everybody there is putting on a show. It's a deeply impoverished setting, but everybody is playing like they're, we're fine. Oh no, we're just slumming it tonight. Or, we do this ironically, that sort of thing. And then it always culminates in these gala events where you're actually put face to face with the biggest faker, but also if you are exposed, she can flat out annihilate you.
Wow. Yeah. I like the modern themes there of, how we present ourselves on social media versus how we are in, pandemic times.
Well,
There is a lot there that I think, goes beyond just the medieval or post-medieval monarchy setting that Dementlieu is ostensibly about.
I mean, I think that you see this throughout not just horror stories, but you also see this throughout fairy tales, throughout folk stories like this, where it's like there's 1,000 different tellings of Cinderella, which get from some more child-friendly versions, but then, some versions which are much gorier, and they evolve over time. And in that same sort of tradition, we have a domain here where at one time it was very effective for a certain type of horror, but then in 2020, it has evolved to be a very different take that I'm hopeful will be more resonant with a modern audience.
Yeah. So beyond the Dark Lord, what other characters or scenarios would be in Dementlieu that people will be getting here in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft?
So one of the interesting things with Dementlieu is that we contracted the domain. Dementlieu used to be a number of cities and a countryside and so on and so forth. We have narrowed the entire domain down to a single city, the city of Portalucine, which is the capital where many of the richest members of society are. It's a urbane place, like high politics, high scholarship, but also high poverty. So it has this sort of, You know,
Is,
almost
is there a clarinet playing in the background in this city? So you guys might hear that.
lots of music, lots of art. Um, like there's even like a creepy wax museum, elements
Ooh,
like that. But so we've narrowed the domain to this single city. People still talk about there's other parts of the domain, like, oh, there's the city of, or there's the town of Chateaufaux over there, or I come from so and so. They're all made up. They don't exist. There's just the mists beyond the city. So
interesting.
even the domain itself is to an extent a lie.
I love. Oh God, that's so creepy to think about. And there's this idea of fairy tales, and we mentioned how that's been very kid friendly in the past. And somehow, when you take those kid friendly images and creepify them, it makes it even more terrifying, right? So there's part of that involved. You mentioned them with the wax museum, but there's also what types of horror elements will people be encountering in Dementlieu?
Well, I mean, a perfect example of that is like any good fairy tale, you need to have a fairy godmother. So there is very much there's a area in here called the Three Odd Gables, which is just three creepy houses that are outside of town, which are pretty much the home of three creepy old hags. And if you get an invitation to Duchess Dianere's gala, you don't have anything to wear. How could you possibly like pose as one of these important people? You can go to the three hags here, you can make a deal with them, and they will fairy godmother you up. But by the same token, you are still dealing with hags, and you're perhaps making a bargain that you won't be able to pay off if you even manage to survive the gala itself. So it's one of these escalating bad situations, like, do we deal with the gala? How do we deal with this horror? Oh, we survived, but now we're indebted to this other group, so on and so forth. So
Wow.
if you continue lying, if you continue posing, you're just getting yourself deeper and deeper and deeper.
Tell one lie leads to another. I am creeped out already, and I'm thinking of the fairy godmother scene in Cinderella, of course. And as a child, it's played up for isn't this amazing magic that's happening in front of you? But if you really think about the fact that these animals are being transformed into human and how they act and in all that ways, like that's actually really a creepy idea.
Yeah,
And I love that this domain is all about playing with that and how, perhaps they're not willing recipients of this transformation magic.
absolutely. And the whole domain is spun in a way where if you want to play this as a very like the predominant population is humans and you have this like political game that's being played, you can absolutely do that. But you can also look at more fairy tale elements. You can play up the fantasy of this, and you can have like a diverse peoples. You can have like drow nobles rubbing elbows with orc nobles and play up the fey elements of it and have it be like a very high fantasy sort of element. But despite all the whimsy inherent to that, that only serves to further counterbalance the fundamental creepiness of it. So I love the idea of making this domain sort of like, like the masquerade scene in Labyrinth or something like that, just as like, oh, this is whimsical in the creepiest possible way.
So fun. Great. Well, any other kind of details about Dementlieu that you'd love to talk about in the story, and are any hints on how to potentially deal with their Dark Lord?
Well, that right there is the thing that we focus on in the domain right up. While every domain in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft gives you an overview of the domain, it gives you an overview of the Dark Lord, it tells you all about the adventures you can have there. There is usually one experience that's really focused on. And we drill down pretty deep on, so you're going to the masquerade. How do you get set up? How do you talk your way past the door if you don't have an invitation? What happens during the gala? What are the social niceties that you can get involved in? How can those go horribly wrong? And this is one of the only domains that comes with its own specific box text for, if Duchess Sadria calls someone else out, you have a little script for how that goes down.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to see how that is dramatized in play. And there is so much fun stuff to play with there. And we're only scratching the surface of this one domain. And so there's multitudes available in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which comes out on May 18th. And thanks, Wes, for talking through Dementlieu and all the fun, creepy fairy tale stories that D&D fans might be able to engage in coming soon.
Thanks for having me.
Sweet.